This is the Fox 5 Morning News at 8 o'clock on this Wednesday, January 8th, and you're looking live right now, Washington, D.C., as the nation, and in fact the world, awaits President Trump in making his statements on what happened yesterday. Of course, the attack from Iran onto U.S. bases in Iraq with those missile launches that happened just about 12 hours ago.
We have a terror threat expert, Wendy Patrick. She's standing by here as well as we wait to see what the president is going to say. You know, Wendy, last night as we were waiting to see the president come to take the podium, he chose not to speak last night. He chose not to speak last night. He said all is well, issued a tweet and said, "You'll hear from me in the morning." Is that good news?
It's very good news that he did not speak off the cuff last night. And of course, they didn't have time to really get a teleprompter speech ready for him to deliver. This is just too important to come out of the gate and say something that he won't be able to take back, particularly because literally the world is watching. So what's happened between last night and this morning, what we're understanding, is just a series of closed-door meetings where the response this morning is more likely not only to be measured, but also to be commensurate, to be proportional, to be something that takes into account the now, I suppose, growing knowledge that intentionally there were no U.S. military or civilians killed. And if in fact that is the case, can we continue to de-escalate the rhetoric? That's what I expect to hear from the president this morning. I think it's going to be very measured. I think that he takes this very seriously, much more so than some of the other off-the-cuff speeches he's used to giving, and that's what we're going to see hopefully in a couple of minutes.
We talk so much about optics when you're here, and it just seems like after the killing of the Iranian general and then after launching more than a dozen missiles, it really comes down again to optics, and each leader of each nation basically making a stance for their country, and to save face was a term that we used earlier. Is that where we stand now, expecting the president to say everything's even because Iran said we don't want an escalation of war?
Well, it's interesting. You would think the answer could be yes, because the president is the commensurate negotiator. He is used to negotiating deals. He's used to being able to let everybody save face. Remember what we're hearing from on the ground in Iran, that apparently the news outlets there are claiming that 30 Americans were killed. So, I mean,
some saying 80.
Okay, so that's even worse. That's even worse. So if it's a saving face exercise on the ground there, now, you know, of course, news gets out no matter where you are in the world nowadays. Is that going to be something the president emphasizes, is maybe done, one and done? But you got to say that threat analysts are also looking and saying we can't simply assume that because Iran says one and done in so many words, that that's in fact true. And there's no way we're going to let our guard down, even as we look for some sort of an off-ramp, a military off-ramp at this point.
I think it'll be interesting, too, and some are waiting to see what the president will say and how he is going to walk back that very red line that he drew. He was very specific. He was very stern. He was very clear about what the reaction was going to be from the U.S. if Iran took any action. He said any action towards the U.S. How will he walk back from that? Can he walk back from that?
He'll distinguish what Iran did from the statement that he made, in the same way we do in a courtroom. You can always distinguish different facts and circumstances. That's what he'll do. He will emphasize what he did in his tweet, which, by the way, I also think was not as off the cuff as we're used to seeing. That maybe of course, we all know they were stationed there, but that wasn't technically a U.S. base. Anything that he can say to make it seem like he recognizes what Iran did does not violate the red line he drew. That is what I intend to see during the speech, among other things.
Does the president address the fact that Iran warned Iraq an hour before those missiles were launched, knowing full well Iraq then tells the Americans?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we've heard a lot about during even just the last hour, that there was forewarning that exactly something like this would happen, so that even if there were Americans there, they would have time to find safety. They also are going to emphasize the fact that the base was in a more remote area where there was unlikely to be the kind of collateral damage civilian-wise that we sometimes see.
What is the message that you think Iran was trying to send yesterday to its own people? You have a country, I don't even want to say divided, because there's a small percentage who's in support of the government. Most people living within Iran, Wendy, are not for their government. Yet with the killing of General Soleimani, in some way attacking Iranian pride has unified both the hardliners and the people who wanted to change that. So Iran had to take a stand yesterday, had to say something to its people. What was the message to its people?
No doubt that they won't be bullied, that they're going to defend their own, that they're going to do what our president says is we're going to make sure we defend every American wherever they are in the world. So too other countries feel the same need to save face, as you correctly put it, and that's probably the message that was sent. Now, it could have been much worse because there were other targets and other target-rich environments that could have been selected, but they weren't.
Capabilities is, I think, part of the message here that Iran was sending.
Yes.
We could have, but we didn't.
Right.
But look, is that something that we have to take into account? Because we were talking earlier with Rick Epps about asymmetric warfare, if you will. This is not Iran's style. They're more of a drawn-out, patient, strategic, revenge is a play best served cold, if you will, for lack of a better term. And they use their proxies in attacks and terrorist organizations and things like that. Do we look forward in a couple of years from now? Or is this over now, is what I'm trying to figure out.
We never let our guard down,
Right.
would be the easy answer, the general answer. But it also, I agree, they're showing they have the capability to not use proxies, but to actually fire from
Sure.
Iran. Now, the fact that they didn't all hit their target, that doesn't mean they're a bad shot. It's to the contrary. That's what
means they're
people
a
are saying.
good
It
shot.
means they're a good shot,
Yeah.
and we're able to hit what they wanted to hit
Sure.
and not hit what they didn't want to hit. But still, it is a showing of force. Is it sufficient? No doubt they'll be taking the temperature of their own citizens in the same way we do all around the world in our own countries.
Again, we're looking at live pictures from Washington, D.C. We're waiting on the president to address the nation, address us about what happened overnight in Iraq. Wendy, you are a terror threat expert. If I could share on a personal note, I should have been in Paris today and in London, and we canceled a trip when the news came out over the weekend. A lot of people feeling uneasy, scared possibly about what has happened. Do you think this will be the end of it? Can people per se go back to what their daily lives and traveling? Because with so many of the proxy wars and then the allies that they have in the region, will this end here, or is this just a possible pause and our lives are going to change again?
You know, it's probably somewhere in between the two, and we have to remember we just had that airline go down right afterwards,
Right.
and then maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. But the issue in general is larger than that. It's, do people feel comfortable traveling in light of what's going on in the world? You know, I've been on the show before giving travel safety tips, and just the fact that we've done that on several occasions goes to show that this is cyclical. We let our guard down for a while, something else happens some way in the world, sort of reminds us that we're all vulnerable. We live in a target-rich environment. I mean, airports are a target-rich environment. As you know, President Trump proved that last week. Drone strikes can occur anywhere. So when people are traveling, the very least they can do is take the kind of precautions. Find out the local emergency numbers that wherever you're going. Pre-program them into your phone. Carry a cell phone charger so you're not the person that runs out of battery when you need to make a call, or post on social media letting loved ones know you're safe. These are all things we can think through even if we're traveling domestically, as many of us do.
And canceling flights to Europe, canceling flights anywhere, it brings back the days right after 9/11. It was
does.
years of you just had that in the back of your mind. You're scared to go here, you're scared to go there.
You always had a plan B.
You always had to have a plan B and a plan C. Does this hasten at all or change at all the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq and from the region overall? Because Iraq said, hey, get out of here. And Iran said that their second level to this was to get all American troops out of the entire region. How does this change that?
I would imagine that's being re-strategized in light of what's just happened. And that re-strategizing is going to occur not just within the closed doors at the White House and in the Pentagon, but probably also with our allies. This is something that they're going to have to rethink, rediscuss. And it's probably something that they intended to be having this discussion, because remember, Iran said they would retaliate. We were just waiting to see what exactly that would look like.
Is that retaliation, you think there? I think there was reading a report that Iran has people here within the U.S. I mean, under everyone's breath, they're talking. Could anything happen possibly here in the United States later?
It could, because remember, it's not just Iranians, it's supporters.
Yes.
And people hear that they can be of any nationality, but if they are sympathetic, if they are supporters, they could choose to take action. In fact, many of the domestic attacks we've seen have been inspired, many of them online. I mean, that's a worldwide issue, by what's going on in other parts of the world. So you can be radicalized through the internet without actually even meeting your role models and mentors. We've seen that on countless occasions.
It feels like we haven't talked about the threat alert and the threat levels in a while. This happens and suddenly that conversation comes up again. You see the extra security on our bases here and on bases throughout the country, at airports. Everybody's kind of getting back up to that point. It seems like we have a short attention span of what happened 18, 19 years ago on September 11th. Do we need to get back to having that level of concern and that level of awareness?
Wouldn't it be great if we could always have that level of concern and that level of awareness? If we could always be off our phones, our earphones are out of our ears, our sunglasses are off, we are paying the kind of attention that we would if we were walking through a dark parking lot at night. If we were actually paying attention to our surroundings, looking people in the eye. Every time something like this happens, we're very vigilant for a couple of days. But you know, there are some people that have actually been trained to always behave that way, and they'll say they wish they could relax and sort of de-stress and let their guard down. It's kind of great to have friends and companions like that, because most of us are not. So it's a great question, Raul. I hope we will all take this seriously and exercise that extra level of precaution.
At 8:09, these are live pictures that we're looking at from Washington, D.C. We were expecting the president to speak to the nation at 8 o'clock. We're running about 10 minutes behind. It looks like there's somebody walking up to the podium. As soon as we hear him and we see him, we will take it live. Wendy, good news that we're hearing from him this morning and we didn't hear anything last night, because last night there was some talk that we were supposed to hear from the president. Then all of a sudden the message came out that he would speak to the nation in the morning.
It is very good news that he has taken a pause, taken the time to regroup, and most importantly, taken the time to be briefed by those that have the kind of on-the-ground knowledge and the institutional knowledge necessary to help him make the right decision. He's a businessman. He knows he has to surround himself with those who know more about foreign policy than he does. He has sought to do that over the last couple of years. Thankfully, he did it between last night and this morning, and I think that's going to be reflected in his speech.
Take us into those back rooms right now in this conversation that the president was having with his advisors and the Iranian officials yesterday, saying they do not want an escalation of war.
Right.
Do American officials believe them? Because, I mean, trust is hardly anything that we've ever had with Iran, and that relationship has been strained at best. At what point do you believe that statement? Do you not believe that statement?
You probably don't believe it yet. You know, you've heard the phrase trust but verify. Many times we have distrust and verify as at least the ground rules moving forward this early on. Trust is something that has to be earned. Many people don't believe it's one and done, even if Iran says it is. So obviously, continuing negotiation would really be the only way that we would have any better assurance. And right now there isn't any negotiation at all. And I know we've heard lots of talk about, well, this isn't quite the way to get them back to the table. Surely cooler heads will prevail, but sometimes that takes time. So the president's speech this morning hopefully will be a step in that direction. That is probably the kind of thing that's being discussed right about now, right before he takes center stage.
Sure.
You know the law. Yesterday, Iran said that legally they were allowed to respond. There is some concern today whether that was legal, what they did. Is it?
It's in the same vein as people are discussing whether or not the assassination was legal. So, you know, as you both know, having spent some time in law school, the analysis surrounding behavior like this and actions taken, especially military actions, when they're in the face of an imminent threat, the game is a little different. The rules are a little different. There are more allowances made. However, do these circumstances qualify? That's really going to be the ultimate question. And that's probably what legal experts around the globe are analyzing right now, many of them with more facts and details than we have yet.
Timing has been such a conversation piece here, because we know this general was no saint. He was responsible for hundreds of American deaths and terror throughout the world. That's a fact. But it's a matter of the timing in all of this and why do this now. Other countries have condemned Iran's actions, but I'm not quite sure when the killing of the general happened, their statement, because the British Prime Minister, Swedish, Finnish Prime Ministers, German, they're all condemning Iran's actions. How is the world seeing what's going on here? Are they sitting back and saying, what are these two doing?
Well, it depends on where you live in the world and how much news you're allowed to be exposed to.
Allowed to be exposed to.
Yes, exactly. Because
Well said.
those countries that have all of the facts, many of them might think, well, wait a minute, after the storming of the embassy, the killing of the American contractor, what was the president supposed to do? Nothing. And then what if something more serious happened and it came to light that, well, he actually did have this foreknowledge that another attack was imminent. Now, we've heard from some members of Congress that have been briefed, know some of these facts, and there's a dispute as to the imminence of it, I should say. But we don't have all the information. It has not yet been declassified, so it's impossible to draw those judgments yet.
Will we know? Will we know all of it?
Well, if it's something that can be declassified, yes, but not everything can be declassified. I mean, everybody watching understands that we would be compromising the integrity of our security forces if we just said, okay, full transparency, everybody's going to know everything we do, because that would mean our enemies would know it too.
But if it was an imminent threat, as the president said, would that not need to be said to the American people who are asking questions of what was the threat? What was the plan?
Well, I think that did Congress need to know? The American people, I think that they're not in that very small need to know group. If it's a threat to America, probably. But this was something that apparently, from what we know thus far, was confined to that area of the region where the attacks were happening. And if that's so, is that something that should have been shared with Congress? Or, as the president said, is it something that really just due to the timeline needed to be done right away and then questions could be answered later, as is apparently occurring today with the debriefings that are set to happen on the Hill?
As a terror threat expert, you know that the folks in that region, they live with a constant fear of attacks and terrorism and bombs left and right. But then that region is also trying to kind of create a new form of economy and tourism. We talked earlier about Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They're creating their own economies. How does that affect them? Because essentially all those guys are neighbors. They share borders with Iran.
Right. No, it definitely affects. It affects everything from tourism to people that live there to daily life in the same fashion that 9/11 affected us here.
Exactly.
You know, when you raise the threat level, no matter where you live, it does impact all of those things. You mentioned travel, Shali. That is one of the most important things. And this plane crash this morning didn't help matters much either. Even if you can't logically tie, and I say logically because it sure doesn't seem like a coincidence, but so far we don't have any facts to say otherwise. But all of that impacts not only the people that live there, but their neighbors as well.
Yeah, if we could just update on that plane crash, because I know that that's also been a concern for a lot of people as well, that a plane did crash in Tehran shortly after takeoff. I believe the numbers were killing about 176 people on board. The latest information that came out is that Iran did say that they would not be turning the black box over to Boeing, who created that plane. It's still not clear where that black box is going, but some are saying, wait a minute, what happened here?
And then the other side is saying, well, the protocol would be to have the country where the flight originated be the ones that take the lead on the investigation. There's always dueling narratives surrounding
Which is Iran.
That's right.
And it's Ukrainian Airlines. There was just so many, like you can't write that stuff. It was hard to believe.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we want the black box. That's exactly why there is this, you know, why do they get to do it first? Just because they have the lead, if in fact that's the protocol, can't we be involved? And then, of course, when we do have more information, maybe we'll understand a little bit better as to, you know, maybe there is some information they can share with us. But I suppose they probably want to see the information themselves first.
The message to Iraq here, because a lot of the attacks and their oil and that whole region, what is the message to the people in that country?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, the president would say we want to make sure that our goal is not to escalate war. I mean, we would like to get along, we would like to negotiate, but query what Iran's message would be right now. Definitely the message is we don't need proxies, we can hit you directly, but the fact that they didn't target anybody that was at those locations, maybe that's a message in and of itself as well.
Because they could have.
They could have, and again, they could have chosen targets where they would have not only have hit those targets, would have killed Iraqis and Americans, but would have had a significant amount of collateral damage. And for whatever reason, those targets were not selected.
They weren't.
Yes. Like I say, let's not let our guard down. So far, that has not happened.
I think it's possibly Iran, and both Iran and the U.S. understand the cost of war. I think I was listening to the Ayatollah talking about that the U.S. knows they get entangled. We got allies all over the place. Yes, he said, they could harm, U.S. could harm Iran, but then what?
Well, it's easier to get into war than get out of war. Everybody knows that. Everybody recognizes that, which is why there's really a premium on, can we just have more discussion on the front end? Let's all watch what we say. Let's try to dial it back. We've had the same discussion when we've been talking about North Korea. No matter where in the world the conflict is taking place, we always want cooler heads to prevail. And that's one of the reasons that it was a good thing, as you asked me earlier, that the president didn't come out with a statement last night. Not only would it have been less likely to be accurate, but it also would not have been vetted in the way that has been done between last night and this morning, to where what the American people hear is more likely to be accurate, more likely to be comprehensive and include the latest and greatest information. Remember, we didn't have that last night. And also more likely to be more measured, level-headed, and read off of a teleprompter.
I was going to say, so you're leaning towards this is a prepared statement. He's going to read off a prompter.
Absolutely.
No flying off the cuff.
No off the cuff. Absolutely not.
It's interesting. Waiting, obviously, for the president. These are live pictures in Washington, D.C. this morning. How does the move by Iran leave they say, okay, well, now we're leaving the nuclear pact that we agreed on. U.S. kind of left that last year, the year before.
Right.
So what does that mean?
Well, they have to take steps in response to the assassination.
Yeah.
They have to do something. And so on their end, they probably thought, well,
because the other countries still in that pact are like, wait a minute, don't leave that.
Right, and that's just it. Is it's not just the U.S. and Iran. There's just too many other countries that are involved, and that's one of the reasons that everybody has to step back and consider how will this impact not only our own citizens but our allies as well. And that is probably one of those decisions that had that in mind when they made it. And again, Raul, nothing is forever. Who's to say circumstances aren't going to change there as well?
Yeah.
You know, I'm the eternal optimist.
Yeah.
But always never let your guard down. I'm always saying that on the show as well.
Just looking down at some notes, I want to go back to the flights, because how Americans' lives have changed over just the past few days. Many are scared. There are Iranian Americans living here in the U.S., especially in Southern California, largest population living outside of Iran. Many, many, many concerned about their family and friends back home. Regardless of who you are, your life has changed in the past 3 days, whether it's with travel, whether you're stopping and thinking about how the world has changed, whether we're going to war again. I was just looking down at some of these notes that were given to us by the producer, learning that the FAA and other nations, France, suspending flights over much of the Middle East. The past day, three or 4 days, things are changing.
They are changing, and you know, travel aside, even those who live here that are Iranian American, as you mentioned, or look like there are, worry about themselves being victimized. We worry about hate crimes. We worried about that after 9/11. In other words, simply because you represent a country that is at odds with the U.S., that has set off these missiles, whatever it is, you worry yourself about you and your family, even if you live here. So when you take that and you add that, the analysis about where do you go, how do you travel, you know there's many Americans that just aren't going to do it. They aren't going to feel safe, even if this plane crash is unrelated, or at least we don't have the evidence right now to say otherwise. Makes everybody think twice. Now on the airline's part, I'm going to put on my business ethics professor hat for a second. They may wonder whether or not they're going to charge for people changing travel plans in the wake of what we've just endured. And of course, the airlines that don't are probably going to win the popularity contest. Those that do may be shamed on social media, and that's going to affect the bottom dollar as well, because travel is always of imminent concern when we're in an issue like this.
I like that we're talking about all this. We need to get this information, and what about this? It's just social media. I think everything has changed how quickly we expect to have this information, and it's interesting that you point out that a lot of these things you can't share it with the public. I mean, if you think about this is national defense thing we're talking about here. We're talking about missiles and that kind of thing. Let's talk about the fact that those missiles, the Pentagon reports, intentionally missed the U.S. troops. So we're going back to talking about the message and the optics of the whole thing. What now when those missiles don't strike and don't kill anybody? What is the message being sent there?
Well, the message is probably being sent that they could have, but they chose not to. Remember, this is the whole proportionality debate is, would it have been overkill to actually kill a number of Americans in response to the action that was taken by the president? And you bring up a good point on social media. One of the things that the White House said in response to, well, you didn't come to Congress first, is that this was too serious to leak. It's very hard to ensure that even top secret information that is shared anywhere doesn't not only leak out from Congress, but then make its way onto social media and leak out to the world.
Right.
So these are the kinds of things that go into that initial analysis as to, well, why didn't the president go through Congress? And then on the Iranian side, why did they select not only to choose the targets they did, but then to tell Iraq what they were going to do with enough time to spread that information to the U.S. to get everybody out of harm's way if they were ever in harm's way on those bases.
Talking about social media, I saw a numerous amount of times hard revenge. Was this the hard revenge that Iran and the people were? On a side note, the conversations happening on social media, on Twitter, the back and forth, it's almost like having to follow everybody to see what the newest thing coming out. It's a new way of communicating, Wendy.
And that is such a great point, Shali, because it's not always accurate communication, which is why so many social media users are on different platforms. When you talk about acts of war, potential acts of war, this is too serious to get the wrong information.
Twitter in certain number of characters, and
That's
you're
right.
trying to understand what some of these messages are. We're talking about war, possible war, in a hashtag.
Yes.
We're talking about violence in a hashtag.
And that's what the president did last night, is he gave us a tweet that was our only way, sort of our portal into being able to see what's going on, what's happening, is it good or bad news for the U.S., what happens next. That's all we had. We're going to obviously have a lot more this morning if he ever takes the stage, which I know he will eventually.
Which, by the way, it's 25 minutes late at this point. You would, obviously an important nation.
I'm sure there are
important
important
message for the
reasons.
nation and
That's
the
right.
world. We're all awaiting, obviously, but he's about 25 minutes late right now.
But this will be accurate information. It'll be more accurate
Sure.
information than what we consume on social media. But because people understandably are concerned, they're on Twitter, they're on even Facebook on their news feeds. They are looking wherever they can to try to figure out what's next. Should we be worried? Do we cancel our trip to Paris, Shelley, as you were saying? Do we worry about our relatives that are of Iranian descent that live here in the States? Are they going to be targeted out of retaliation?
Well, we had those reports that we were covering in the news earlier this week, Wendy, about the Iranian Americans reportedly at the border at Canada trying to get back in that were actual citizens of the U.S. We ran a story right here on the morning news, and her and her family and kids, according to her, were detained at the border, she said, because of her Iranian background, even though she was a U.S. citizen.
That's right, and everybody is being very careful and cautious and thinking, safety first, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of that. Now, knowledge is power, and as we gain more knowledge, we will be able to make better decisions as to, well, who is safe, who isn't, are we okay to travel, what travel restrictions might be appropriate, but we're just in the breaking news mode right now, so it's hard to do that analysis
And it's worth noting that the people who live here, the largest Iranian population outside of Iran, most of them fled that government in the 70s, 78. Most of them escaped that government, left some family behind, but they recognize this as being their home.
That's right, and it's heartbreaking for them to watch what's going on over there, and it's also heartbreaking for many citizens there, as you point out.
Okay, it looks like the staff is coming out and the president's about to address the podium. We'll take you live to D.C., obviously, as soon as he comes out. But again, despite the fact that per U.S. reports that no one was injured, no one was killed, this still qualifies as probably the most brazen attack, the most overt attack on the U.S. by Iran in the 40-plus years that we've had this strained relationship,
Absolutely,
correct?
and we can't downplay it just because of the things that we've mentioned about no Americans being killed, no Iraqis being killed. We can't downplay the seriousness of the fact that it occurred, even though it appears to have been in retaliation for our action. So, all correct. And I'm sure the president will address that as well.
Do you think we're going to hear because in the tweet last night, I think a lot of people were struck by the fact that he used the terms all is well, so far so good.
He started off that way, absolutely. Yeah. And it appears to have been an attempt to ease the fears of the Americans, and I expect we'll see a lot more of that during his speech this morning.
Okay, and again, we're waiting for the president who was supposed to address the nation around 8 o'clock, so obviously putting some fine tuning on that statement. Here comes the president. Let's take you live to D.C.